At issue this week, confidence in the carbon tax. It is set to increase on April 1st, but the Conservatives say the government should stop it altogether. In fact, the party made its Opposition Day motion a vote of non-confidence. That failed, but the rhetoric in the days before was at a campaign pitch.
An election on the price on pollution? We had 3, Mr. Speaker, and we won them all.
Wow. Then he shouldn't be afraid to have one more.
So how effective is this performative push by the Conservatives, and could another election be fought over the issue of the carbon tax? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne and Althia Raj. Good to see you all. A week away from you makes the heart grow fonder. Chantal, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of the Conservative strategy here? Obviously, they're trying to keep the momentum going on the premiers calling on some changes and trying to make sure that hike doesn't go ahead on April 1st.
A couple of points. It was clear a week ago that the government was not going to back down on the hike. So what this was about was mostly political theater. In the best case scenario, I'm guessing the Conservatives could have hoped that there would be some breakaway Liberals who would have voted with them. That did not happen. On the contrary, it seems to me that Justin Trudeau has managed to kind of reinforce caucus solidarity over the carbon tax. And final point, I'm old-fashioned. If you move a motion of non-confidence that would throw the country into a snap election, and you're the leader of the official opposition, I think you should show up in person for the vote. Mr. Poilievre did not. He voted virtually. Because he had a fundraiser in Toronto. That does send a message that it is political theater.
And so was it worth doing then, Andrew, to try and make the point that this is something that Canadians are talking about more and more?
Well, he's got 11 days until the increase goes in. So that's 11-day window in which he can milk this for all it's worth, because it's current, it's in front of people, and people are at least in the Premier's ranks, people are running scared or running opposed to this. But once it's gone through, I don't think it's going to remain top of mind for every Canadian for the months and months after that, between that and whenever the next election is likely to be. So sure, this is your maximum opportunity to score your points and to make the government look weak. I agree with Chantal that it doesn't look really great when you don't show up for your own vote. It makes it look like what it is, which is performative theater. But the performative theater is part of politics.
Althia?
Well, I think it could be a good communication strategy for the opposition. I agree that if you're going to take non-confidence motions seriously, you should be there in person. But beyond that, I mean, I'm not actually convinced that the Conservatives wanted to have Liberals vote with them, because they have had some Liberals, mostly from Atlantic Canada, vote with them in favor, for example, of a new carve-out for farmers when it comes to the carbon price. But here, by making it a motion of non-confidence, you knew this was going to be a whip vote. So really, all the Conservatives are after is that clip of the NDP members voting with the Liberals, the Bloc Québécois members voting for the Liberals, all the Liberals in Atlantic Canada who say to their constituents that they don't like this price on carbon, voting with the government. This is about making the Conservatives the only option for change. And who cares what the motion says? The optics are what they're going to capitalize on, and that's all that mattered today. That was all what this game was about.
So at what point then, Chantal, though, do the Conservatives have to be prepared to answer the other part of the question, which is, okay, you don't want a carbon tax, message received, but what do you want? What is the thing that you're going to put in the window?
Well, there are a lot of interesting questions. For instance, the carbon tax on heavy emitters. At some point, every tax filters down to the consumer. So basically, you're going to have to say, we don't believe that reducing Canada's carbon emissions do anything to combat climate change. So we will do very little. Or else you say, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then you're going to see the usual are these measures going to work? I believe that at this point there are many conservatives who believe that Canadians are willing to buy as long as it doesn't cost me anything, I'm fine with not having much of a climate change policy.
Yes,
Andrew?
I think two things are different now than in the past.
Yes.
One is that because of the economic situation, people have put the environment much lower on the list of priorities, rightly or wrongly. And secondly, the government is in such odium now that a certain proportion of the voters are going to cut the Conservatives some slack on this because they're so eager to get rid of the Liberals. So I predict, I don't like it. I would like to see the Conservatives come out with some kind of alternative policy. It wouldn't be as good as carbon pricing, but it would at least be a policy. But I don't anticipate it. I think they will skate as long as they can and come up with something as vague and as uncontroversial as they can, and I suspect they'll get away with it.
Althia?
But skating is a decision in itself, in the sense that if you're not telling industry that you support a price on carbon, you are telling them to hit pause. They're making business decisions based on the environment that the Conservative leader is creating, and that creates a lot more uncertainty. You know, he hasn't done that when it comes to $10 a day daycare, for example. He has said he will keep the program, so nothing prevents him from saying that. He is choosing to send that signal. But if we can just go back to the vote, because I think that there's something else that's really interesting, at least to me. It's the nuance. Is the nuance going to be lost? Like, I think the Conservatives are banking that there are low information voters and people are just going to have the attention of a clip on social media. The Bloc Québécois had some very good speeches in the House today, where they made the very good point that all these Conservative members from Quebec are basically voting against Quebec's interests. If you take away the federal backstop, then it means that Quebec is one of the two jurisdictions with the price on carbon. That means that things in that province are more expensive. That's bad for Quebecers, and yet you have a bunch of Conservative MPs from Quebec voting with the Conservatives on this motion. So will the Bloc Québécois be able to make an argument that is more nuanced? Because they're also saying, hey, if you had a straight up non-confidence in the government, we would have voted for it. But then you tied our hands. So I'm curious to see how much appetite there is really in the public to have an argument that's more fleshed out. Because clearly right now, the scare tactics on like 23% increase, like I got stopped on the street today, is everything going to go up by 23%? That is working. That has gone beyond Parliament Hill. These are like real people who are really concerned because of they've heard what Pierre Poilievre has said. That message has resonated.
Without hearing the second part, in that there is a rebate, whether you get it all back or not. Chantal?
Interestingly enough, there is no anguish over this in Quebec. No one has stopped me on the street to say, why are we not getting rebates? Because people in BC and Quebec are not getting rebates, they are paying that price. No political party or none of those represented in the National Assembly, we have more than a couple, is advocating a change in the Quebec climate change strategy. And so will it work in Quebec? I don't think so. I think the NDP, the Bloc is on solid ground on this. I think a majority of Quebecers are actually going to hold it against the Conservatives, not in every region, not in Quebec City where they have seats, that they are actually not doing very much on climate change, and that they are criticizing Quebec's National Assembly's will to do something about it, which is even more lethal to them.
Quick last word, Andrew.
We have to remind ourselves that rationality is not necessarily at the forefront of this whole debate. Everybody on the Conservative side essentially acts as if the rebates don't exist. They just blow past it. They know that they exist. They know that the data on this is that 80% of households are more than compensated for the increase, but they talk as if they don't exist. The public, for its case, I think a certain proportion of the public knows that they're being lied to and wants to be lied to. That people want to believe or want to pretend that there's a cost-free option out there, that if you just charge the big polluters or if you just put on regulations, that somehow the cost of those won't filter through to the public. And it's a sorry state about democracy, but I'm afraid it's true.
Okay, we're going to take a short break here, but when we return, we'll take a look at the NDP's controversial motion on the Middle East this week.
We were also able to find common grounds on the question of the two-state solution, which is also important for Canadians and for our country.
What kind of blowback will the Liberals face for amending and then supporting the motion? Will it cause issues in caucus? It certainly seems to have already. That's next. At issue, the NDP's controversial motion on the Middle East. Originally, it called for Canada to recognize Palestinian statehood.
Canada has a role to play in building a peaceful future in the Middle East.
That motion put the Liberals on the spot, but last-minute amendments allowed most MPs to support it, even as it angered others.
I think it's the first time in my parliamentary career that I've had a reflection like this, where I truly felt last night that a line had been crossed.
So how did the Liberal government convince the NDP to accept the amendments? How damaging is the motion for the government's foreign policy? Chantal, Andrew, Althia are back. Althia, why don't we start with you? The Liberals managed to get it to this motion to a place that was more palatable, more in line with their own foreign policy. But I wonder how damaging it was, regardless, to them inside caucus, in terms of criticism from Israel.
I think it saved a larger embarrassment, and I think that's why you saw a huge sigh of relief. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Mélanie Joly, on the vote night on Monday had a big smile on her face. Rob Oliphant was kissing Steve McKinnon and hugging Minister Joly. What happened was basically we were in a break week before this week. So MPs were back in their riding, and the NDP had signaled they were going to move this 2 weeks ago. So there were real, constituents lots of constituents talking to their MPs, encouraging them to vote in favor of this NDP motion. And let's be frank, there are far more Muslim constituents than there are Jewish constituents, especially in the battleground ridings around the GTA. And a lot of them, even not people that you tend to think are on the kind of far left of the Liberal Party, were telling the government, I feel like I need to support this motion. So there could have been a position where you had the substantial backbench, perhaps large, like more than the majority, or the majority, voting against the government's position. And so they needed to find a middle ground, and they started working on this on Wednesday, and it really didn't come together until Monday. And the question is interesting about whether or not, if they had an extra day, could they have brought more people on side? I think part of the reason why some people voted against it on Monday was because what had been communicated was really that the NDP was pushing a motion that recognized Palestinian statehood. And for many MPs, that was completely untenable. And, without talking about a negotiated solution. So I think for the greater good of the country, a lot of people felt like this was a good thing because sides are so divided, and that there was nothing that they could have done to brought the Conservatives on side. I do think, and I hope that Mr. Housefather feels like he still has a space. This is the Liberal MP for Mount Royal, who represents a very Jewish riding in the caucus, because I think it is important that we have large parties that are broad tents that include a diversity of views in this country. But it has certainly left people like him feeling very ostracized.
Andrew.
I can't blame him. I mean, this was a pretty cold-blooded decision to cut adrift those three MPs, because as Althea says, if they'd allowed, you have to ask, why did they let the whole motion get debated for a day and then make this complete about-face at the end? Why not just defeat the motion? Well, as I think Althea is suggesting, a good number of Liberal MPs might well have voted with this entirely one-sided motion that not only recognized the state of Palestine, but essentially had nothing substantive to say about Hamas. So she's right. There are more votes to be had on the pro-Palestine, anti-Israel side than there is on the pro-Israel side. And if you're an MP like Anthony Housefather looking at this, you're right to read the tea leaves and say, this party is not making room for me at this point. This party has made a shift.
Yeah, which is how a lot of Jewish Canadians saw that as well. It wasn't just Mr. Housefather, but there was strong reaction within the Jewish community as well. Chantal.
For sure, it was about damage control, or taking the least damage, which is having three MPs vote differently, or having, who knows, 15, 20, 30 MPs. But I believe that the MPs shortchanged themselves in the sense that it's jarring to watch the House of Commons debate a motion for an entire day, and 20 minutes before the vote, we're not talking about an amendment here.
Yeah.
The motion was rewritten
Yes.
20 minutes before the vote.
Several
So
amendments.
basically, whatever was argued all day was not what people voted on. And I also have a question for the NDP, which is, why would you accept that?
Yeah.
20 minutes before the vote. The answer you get is that one of the major lobby groups for Muslim Canadians wanted the motion to pass more than they wanted what was in the initial motion, but that's a weird way of doing business, to put it mildly.
Well,
I don't know if
yeah, go ahead.
so-
Go ahead, Althia.
I don't know if it's a weird way of doing business, because I think what
20
you
minutes
want.
before the vote?
No, but it
after
wasn't-
a whole day of debating something else?
I'm not disagreeing with the part about how odd it was to debate an entire motion and then have that happen, but I just mean on the Canadian Muslim group participating in the discussion.
Yep.
I think it's a good thing that we came to a resolution that is more inclusive of a variety of people's views and less polarizing. I want to say that I think for a lot of Jewish Canadians who feel rightfully like they are under attack for things that they have nothing to do with, that they feel unsafe in their own communities, that they worry about their children going to school, that they feel like they're being harassed, Anthony Housefather gave a very, very good speech on Monday talking about that. And I encourage, I know probably most people won't do this, but to go read Hansard and read the speech. It was really touching and moving, and we need voices that talk about what is going on in this country. But on the idea of like having everybody around the table trying to work to an agreement, I agree. And yes, what the NDP won is really kind of peanuts in a way. But is it not better to have more people vote for a diluted motion than to have a more polarized electorate on such a sensitive issue that is bringing people on the streets every day? Like that to me, I think should have been
except I think
should
some
be the
Jewish
goal.
Canadians would say it is polarizing still, the way it was. But anyway.
It still has
an
been far
interesting-
less polarizing than it would have been originally.
Chantal, then
It's-
Andrew,
it's-
and then I got to go. Yeah.
It's an interesting assumption that because Parliament papers over differences, they are actually less or decreasing polarization in the country. I don't disagree with what was in the final motion, but if that's what you're going to do for a day's work, maybe you should just stay home.
Andrew, last
Because basically you're restating government policy, one.
Yes.
Two, I do believe that Canada kind of got lucky in the sense that they are in the larger trend of where the U.S. is going on this because of the debate it's been having with Israel over next steps. But still, this is not a way for Parliament to function.
Okay, Andrew, last word.
Well, I think there's a real difference, though, between the position the Liberals have been staking out and the position of the Biden administration in the United States. The Biden administration has certainly been critical of Israel for its perceived overkill, or whatever phrase you want to use, but it has also been very clearly in support of Israel's right to defend itself. It is not necessarily clear now that the government of Canada believes in that. That we went from an entirely one-sided motion to one that might be classed as being a false equivalent type of motion. But people in the Liberal caucus and the NDP caucus should reflect upon why Jewish Canadians are feeling the way they do. They're not just making this up. They're not just hypersensitive. They are feeling, I think rightly, abandoned right now. And I think, as I say, I think it behooves the government to reflect upon that and try to do better on this.
We have to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll take a look at Canada's procurement issues and the solutions the Liberals are rolling out. That's next. At issue, Canada's procurement woes. The federal government has announced a new office to oversee procurement after a review found $5 million in fraudulent billing by subcontractors.
We need to do better when it comes to ensuring the integrity and the reputation of our procurement system.
And there are, of course, still questions about the tens of millions of dollars spent to create the ArriveCan app. So are the government's actions enough, or is it too little too late? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Andrew, you want to start us off on this? I mean, it feels like it's too little too late, but I suppose at least they're doing something. I don't know.
Well, it's certainly too late in the sense that it's been clear, I think, from the start, and it's becoming more clear by the day, that ArriveCan is just the tip of the iceberg. that there is much more going on here, not just in IT procurement, but in procurement generally, that it's a bit of a honeypot that all kinds of characters are getting their noses into. So it's one thing to say, well, we're going to police it better, we're going to catch the crooks, et cetera. But I think you have to look more at the systemic questions of what are the openings? Why is it so apparently easy for people to do this? What are the flaws in the process that are making these openings for them? And why is it that with the vast expansion of the civil service we've seen over the last 8 years, we still don't seem to have people who can run a serious IT process, who know enough to be able to contract directly with people rather than having to get these expensive middlemen?
Yeah, and often what has been the case is cases of double or triple billing different departments. That was what they found there. And of course, these other instances of people who have full-time jobs in the public service and then somehow get contracts within the same department for other work. Chantal?
Yeah, Andrew talks about a honeypot. I think the honeypot was even less guarded during the pandemic. And that there's a saying about, no crisis comes without an opportunity. So I suspect that some of the issues that are surfacing are driven by the fact that once you open the gates during the COVID, and it lasted a long time by contract size, a lot of people found a way to take advantage of that. That being said, it also goes a long way to explain why the Liberals were never very eager to have the kind of post-mortem on the management of COVID-19 and the measures and the programs put in place that they pride themselves on. And many of those programs were terribly helpful, but they must have had a sense that it also opened the door to a flood of abuses that they're now slowly but surely trying to uncover before someone else uncovers them, as in the case of the Arrive Can story.
Yeah, Althia?
I think Chantal is saying it without actually saying it, but I think, like her, that this is the tip of the iceberg. I think that there is far more, and I wondered if this week's announcement was just pre-positioning because the government knows what's about to emerge. I don't find it surprising that public servants who know how the system can be manipulated and used, and who know how to get RFP contracts, request for proposal contracts, are doing that on the side. But it does beg the question, how are they allowed to do that? Because I don't actually think the rules are that clear. And so I think that this is a story that is going to keep giving. And I suspect the Conservatives are putting in a whole bunch of access to information requests and order paper questions to try to get more information to follow the money, because, this is a story that it isn't done yet. We're nowhere near the last chapter.
Yeah. Chantal, you want it back in there or no?
I do think the Conservatives should have pushed for a public post-mortem of the handling of COVID. And in hindsight, I suspect some of them regret it, because it would have brought many of those stories to light, and probably more than that.
Yeah, Andrew, last word to you.
I'll just agree.
Well, it would have been a good learning opportunity too, because, yes, they threw all that money out the door hoping it would, catch and solve some problems. But how do we, not do that if we find ourselves in the same position? How do we get better results for the amount of money that we're spending? Like, those are valuable lessons, whoever's in government.
For sure. Okay. Thank you all very much, and nice to see you all again, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.